Ever feel like your problems are too big for you to handle?
Stick with us, and we'll show you that it's not the end of the world.
Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Bearing Up, the podcast on Christian encouragement. I'm Zach, saluting to my whichever direction this is going to be. Is Logan Bruce, the other host of this show. Anyway, how are you, Logan?
I'm great, man. I'm ready to roll tonight. I'm excited. It's been a long week. It's just, my wife's getting more pregnant every day, and and it's just getting more fun every day to see what new challenge is going to pop up, and we're loving life, but I'm ready for this. I'm ready. Let's roll.
Yeah. I do want to say it is, since we're on the day that we're recording, it is Veterans Day. And so I just personally wanted to say thank you to our veterans. My dad is a veteran, served in the Marine Corps. And so I'm thankful for him and others like him.
Absolutely.
Today. You're watching this a week later, but today, as we're recording this, I am thankful. So I just wanted to mention that here at the beginning. But we're going to talk about something that has been on my mind quite a bit. And it is emotional maturity. And so if you saw the tab, if you saw the title before you clicked on this podcast, you know what we're going to be talking about. But emotional maturity is very interesting, and we can look at it from a lot of different perspectives. But there's a website, and I really do not agree with a lot of the things that they are perpetuating. But some of the things that they do, it's just like with anything. You eat the meat, spit out the bones. They have a test. It's called the School of Life, and they have a test on emotional maturity. I'm going to provide a link to an article about this, and it's going to include a video on the bottom, which is sort of the basis for this episode today. We're going to be kind of talking about the same things that are in that video. But this test is just one question. And that question is, when someone on whom you depend on emotionally lets you down, disappoints you, or leaves you hanging and uncertain, what is your characteristic way of responding? So that's the question of the day, right? As we're going to talk about this, here's the question of the day. But I want to add to that, not just when somebody who you depend on emotionally lets you down. I'm going to add, whenever there is a conflict or a stressor in your life, what is your characteristic way of responding? So it's not just when somebody lets you down or disappoints you or leaves you hanging, but when you find yourself in a difficult place.
Sure.
Before we start diving into this and looking at each one of these things, I'm going to ask you, Logan, to confess some things.
I did that enough last week. I'm just kidding.
I will. I will too, though. So it's not going to be just you.
No, you're good.
But when you are stressed out, what is your typical response? Or when somebody disappoints you or something like that, what is usually your response? And I'm not asking you to necessarily admit that, well, I always do this thing and it's really bad.
Sure.
And I mean, you may handle stress pretty well sometimes.
I don't.
Okay.
Now I'm not. We're going to dive into more of like what are the potential, categories of this. But I for sure ignore it. I for sure try to avoid stress. I do that in every form, in every area of my life. Sometimes worse than others. But and I think I've said something to that effect on this show before. But you have this stressor, and my initial reaction is if I ignore it, it will go away.
Yeah.
And that never works. But I will keep trying. I'm just kidding. But generally speaking, that's my initial reaction is I'm going to just try to remove myself. If I ignore this, a prime example is stuff at work. There's this big pile of tractor parts that I have to sort through. Well, I'll ignore it and it'll just disappear. But
Yeah.
no, that is not the case.
Well, yeah, and I feel like, particularly me, I get angry a lot of the time, uh, but the way that I handle that anger oftentimes is to, as typical of the Enneagram 9, to be asleep to it. To
Mm-hmm.
like try to ignore it, and
Sure.
I feel like I do a pretty good job with those who are closest to me. If I have an issue, I will talk to them about it.
Right.
And I don't like try to pretend like they're gonna like somehow realize that I'm upset about it.
Sure.
We're gonna talk about this. These types of responses. But I feel like typical of me, I get angry, but the way that I handle that anger is sometimes to distance. But when I'm really close to a person, I'm usually pretty good at calmly, communicating that really bothered me.
Well, with somebody you know how to communicate with easier, it
Yeah,
is easier.
it
And
comes
so,
easier. Yeah,
and I've said this about, my relationship with my wife. This is one of the things, my withdrawing is one of the things that, like, she does not like. And that's totally
yeah,
understandable. And I understand that. But I've gotten better. I believe I've gotten better at having that conversation as opposed to ignoring it and moving on from it. I'm trying to get better about it, but stress is not an easy thing to just. Oh, I can just change the way I react to this, and it doesn't work that way either.
right. But we can learn and we can develop, we can grow, and
Correct.
that's kind of what we're trying to uh, talk about when we talk about emotional maturity. Just as our bodies mature, just as our attitude may mature, we act differently as we mature. Our emotional maturity is
Mm-hmm.
something that we can develop. So again, that question, maybe you aren't really sure about how you respond, or maybe you're just kind of thinking about, where I am in this, and am I really emotionally mature or am I immature? And I know that for some of you, I might just be taking a hammer and just pounding your toes, uh, because there are individuals, and it's not really anybody's fault, perhaps, but the circumstances that they are in or have been in have caused them to develop emotional maturity much slower.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't. That's not an intellectual thing. It has nothing to do with intellect or smarts. It has nothing to do with like mental health. It doesn't have anything to do with any of that regard. It's
Mm-hmm.
about handling and how we handle our emotions. And so that develops very differently than mental health and physical health and other things of that nature.
Sure.
So, the three primary types of responses that we can measure ourselves in. If you want to, and again, we're going to include this video, but it's also in the other link about that has the article. We're going to leave that in the description. Uh, the guy that's talking, he says you may want to try to rate yourself on a scale from 1 to 10, about where you are and like what you do. So, the first way that people respond when somebody lets them down or disappoints them, or they find some kind of great conflict or stressor in their life, is to sulk. We sulk. Um, and sulking is kind of like having the feeling of being upset, but not communicating why you're upset. And the way that this is kind of equated, if we think about in terms of maturity, when you have a small child that's not verbal yet,
Mm-hmm.
and they cry and they have, they're crying and they're trying to communicate and they can't because they don't have words yet, and the parents have to sort of guess what's wrong with them. So like Graham's 4 now. He's a wonderful communicator, and sometimes he does these like 3 or 4 syllable words, sometimes more, and I'm like, well, that was a big word for you. But I mean, it happens all the time. Like he has a really great vocabulary for a 4-year-old. The other day he said something about he said some kind of term. And he says that's the species of it. And I was like, okay.
That's cool.
But yeah, but there was a time where Graham was not using words yet, and I just had to guess. Like, is he hungry? Is he tired? What is it? But unfortunately, there are individuals that are adults, and maybe you've hurt them somehow, and maybe you didn't even realize that you hurt them. But all of a sudden, they sulk, and maybe it's like a little hissy fit. Maybe it's some kind of, you can tell they're off-putting towards you and things like that, but they're not giving you any information to go off of, right? So there are individuals, and I know individuals, adults, that respond in that way, characteristically.
And I'll say, Zach, that it's way easier to see that from the outside than if you are the person who's doing it.
Right.
And I may be jumping ahead of you, but this is not an attack. If you later think, well, maybe that's me. But that's the idea. Is you want to be able to acknowledge and this is for all of these, acknowledge that yeah, I do that, and react in a more mature way. That's why we're talking about this. But I just thought that was something to remember. If you feel like that's somebody else, they probably don't realize that they're acting like a 3-year-old.
Right. Yeah. And let me say too, and maybe we should have prefaced this. There is a counter side to each one of these things. We're going to talk about that in the second half of this episode. But there is a counter side to each one of these things. So there's going to be a counter side to sulking. There's going to be an area of strength that is opposite of this, where we grow towards, right? And so if we recognize ourselves having any of these bad qualities, they're poor, immature qualities is what they are. So I'm not gonna tiptoe around that. I mean, these are qualities we should not have. To sulk is not a helpful thing in regards to relationships,
and it's not helpful to tiptoe around it either. This is we don't mean to discourage anything other than unchristlike behavior.
Right. And I don't think sulking and not communicating with people and holding grudges and stuff, it's not Christ-like.
Correct.
Right.
Jesus removed himself. He got angry, and we'll talk. I don't know. We could talk about that. That could be a whole thing. But Jesus does remove himself, but it's in a healthy way, where he's handled the situation, then he removes himself. He gets angry, but it's to deal with the situation. So we'll cross those bridges. I may be jumping your gun here. I'm sorry, Zach.
Yeah, you're good. We're going to move to the next one, and that is about anger, right? The next response, characteristic response that people have sometimes when somebody disappoints them. I'm going to reemphasize these points again. Leaves you hanging or uncertain. They get angry, and this is a gut reaction. And there are some times that you may be talking about something and something doesn't work out the way that they want to, and so they play the blame game. Right. They like blame people for like things that maybe they did, or maybe there were things that were just circumstantial that nobody could really help.
Right.
Like somebody might get mad at you because you didn't call them or you didn't show up to some place, but you had a family emergency.
Correct.
Right? You had a family emergency. You have to deal with that.
Right.
But they get mad at you. They get angry at you. And maybe you do this to somebody. Maybe you find yourself, being very quick to anger, and you get mad over small things. Um, and so that again is a sign of emotional immaturity to find ourselves being quick to anger. The Bible talks a lot about being quick to anger. We should not be quick to anger. Uh, and that power is, or that power and that kind of assaulting attitude of anger or wrath or rage, it's a cover for the hurt
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be dealt with in the right way. Um, whether it's a stress or a betrayal or a disappointment or something like that, there is a mature way to handle it rather than to lash out in anger towards people.
Correct. Well, and that's that's where you kind of anger is such an interesting emotion, because I would venture to say that it's one of the only emotions that can be classified in a positive and a negative category. Excuse me. A lot of the times our natural anger falls in that negative category because it's unrighteous, it's sometimes probably unjustified, and it comes from a place of hatred rather than love. And I think that that's when you start talking about anger, that's where it boils down to, is where is it coming from? Jesus' outburst in the temple was more about his love for God and his love for God's house and his love for God's people than it was hatred for the people there. He didn't hate those people at all, but he outburst in an angry way against them. So it talks about Jesus being angry. So that when we get with anger, I think that distinction needs to be clearly made, that there is a fine line between righteous anger and hatred, which is, I think, a lot of times where our anger, at least natural human anger from people, comes from. Maybe not pure hatred, but
Right.
in a way that's like, I don't like you or what you're doing, rather
Right.
than I love this and I love you and you need some tough love. But
Yeah. I mean, Jesus felt righteous anger. It's not necessarily always going to be. And I feel that we also can be angry. We can be
right,
angry about sin. We can be
sure,
angry about, you know, somebody's talking about my God in that way,
mm-hmm.
and we can have that kind of anger. But I think that the way that this question is phrased points to the fact that we are doing this in response not to somebody that has desecrated the Lord's house,
Right,
or uttered blasphemies or anything like that. The question was, when someone on whom you depend on emotionally lets you down, disappoints you, or leaves you hanging and uncertain, or if you experience a conflict or a stressor, these are all things concerning ourselves,
correct.
right?
And,
Somebody's like hurt me in some way.
well, and I think that's why it's important to make sure we just make that distinction,
Exactly. Yeah.
that that's what this is. This falls neatly into the unhealthy anger category or the
Right.
unrighteous anger category, because of what we've led this all up to be, that there's nothing about the situation we've described that should allow us, that warrants anger.
Right. They hit me, so I'm gonna hit them back even harder. you know, that's kind of like what this
Well,
response is. Somebody has hurt me, so I'm going to retaliate with anger. I'll take vengeance on them. I'll respond with rage, with malice.
and a lot of it's very easy for us to compare this with kids because kids are immature. This
Yeah.
morning, this morning, like hours ago, I was getting my daughter out of bed, and my wife was off today, and so I was just getting her out to take her to the couch. She's going to start watching her Barbie show, and I was going to get her lunch ready. She did not want that. Angry. I mean, just hateful screams coming out of her, my cute little 4-year-old's mouth, and she was hitting me on the shoulder, like just angry. Now she's half awake, and so I don't hold that against her. And she wouldn't really comprehend what was going on. She just wanted her mommy, and she knew somebody was taking her away from her. But that's the basic childlike reaction that you're hurting me and I'm mad and I'm going to swing and hit you and I'm going to scream in your face. And I sat her on the couch and I said, here's your Barbie show. Do what you want. She ran back into the bedroom. Whatever. But, that's the childlike reaction of I'm mad. I'm going to scream. I'm going to kick. I'm going to throw punches. It's not a mature thing. And that's kind of where we're going with this, obviously.
Right. Yeah.
And when she's 18 and rewatches all these podcasts because she knows she will, she's going to hear that story and be mad.
Well, it's the same with Graham. He's 4. Right. He doesn't really throw temper tantrums. There are moments though that are pretty close. Yeah. And it doesn't happen a whole lot, but especially when he's tired or something. Mm-hmm. But the thing about it is there are a lot of kids whose parents give in, and they let the children kind of boss them around, and they're just going to be a friend to them, and so they learn like later on in life that they can throw a temper tantrum. Yep. And I'm not going to bring up a personal story that I saw with a parent. I saw a parent do something it made me sick to my stomach because they were letting the child walk all over them. And I was like, that's not going to look cute when she's 25 years old. Parenting
is another episode. We're going to tag that one. I'm putting it in there, but that's another episode, parenting.
Yeah, but but anyway, but that's maybe one of the reasons why.
Sure.
There are adults, they never grew in that maturity as they were younger.
Right.
So they never developed that trait. Yeah. So let's move on to the next one. So the third and final typical response to this question, or if somebody hurts you, or I'm getting tired of repeating it, if you find a conflict or a stressor, is to withdraw. Right? To withdraw. And to withdraw means, of course, to isolate and ignore. A characteristic of withdrawal is to build up a wall rather than admit that you're hurt, that you need help. It's to ghost people. It's to, stay in your room, not talk to anybody. And it's different from sulking, because sulking, there's a visible upsetness. Like you're going around and you're mopey, and maybe you even act kind of like you act disappointed, and you are kind of off-putting. Yeah, you kind of like, yeah. Withdrawal is different in that you are moving yourself away from the person. You don't want to be around them. It's the silent treatment. Which all of that stuff.
Well, until you said silent treatment. Now I can't say what I was going to say. I was going to say, which might be the healthiest of all of these, but then you said it gives you the silent treatment. I was like, well, now it's not anymore.
So, yeah, it seems like this might be, but again, you have a problem.
Right. And
you have an issue that you're not addressing.
Correct. And that, I can speak from personal experience, is the real problem. Sure, there's, maybe it will die down for a while, but the underlying issue does not go away. And I'm preaching to myself right now. I'm like looking at myself in the camera. It doesn't go away because I ignored it. And especially conflicts with my wife or my coworkers. It does not just go away because we ignore it. Sometimes it can actually make future interactions even worse. Because you have failed to acknowledge what was going on.
Right. I do want to say, too, that not only do we do these with people that, disappoint us or whatever, or we do so to other people because of our stressors or other conflict in our life. We may act this way to other people that they didn't do anything to you.
Right.
But we also can do this with God. Mm-hmm. When we face
That's a good point.
other things, we can sulk. We can approach God and say, like, why are you doing this to me? I don't
Yeah.
deserve this. And not try to learn anything from our experience, not try to communicate with God, what you need is just complaining.
It's a good point.
Um, and and to go around and be mopey and to, you know, kind of have that attitude towards him. We also can do that with we can be angry at God because of our circumstances and what we're in. And this third one, I feel like, is very relevant with God. We just are silent to Him.
Mm-hmm.
We get in a situation, and if we have very little faith maturity, our response may not be to jump into prayer at that moment and hand it to God and depend upon Him. And those things are easy to say, but in faith maturity and spiritual maturity, that develops even more and more. And so, again, like these things not only relate to individuals, other people, but they can relate to God too. And that can
Absolutely.
show us our spiritual maturity in connection with our emotional maturity. Um, Before we get into the next part of this, I want to just reemphasize that these are unattractive qualities. They are. uh, I mean, they're childlike. They are immature. I mean, these are things that you might expect of a a toddler or a child, an adolescent, maybe a teenager. You would expect these things from those individuals. But when you're an adult, these are not qualities. It's not, like I said, it's not cute when you're 25. It's really not cute when you're in your 40s or in your 60s.
I would argue it's not cute ever.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Right. But I mean, like, some people, they're like, "Oh, he's getting all pouty, like he's 2 years older.
No.
He's 1 and he's like."
Just kidding.
But yeah, so like, but they're unattractive qualities.
Right.
They're not mature qualities.
Correct.
They don't show somebody that is a stable, well-adjusted adult. It shows somebody that's unstable. Perhaps it shows somebody that is needy.
Yeah.
And so these are unattractive qualities that they damage relationships. Uh, you know, if you're looking to settle down with somebody someday, if you haven't done so already, these are really off-putting to a lot of people.
Yep.
And if they see you acting in that way, they may just drop you. I mean, like, they're just unattractive qualities, and they're harmful qualities in our relationships, and they distance us from the people that we care about most, right? The ones that we most emotionally depend on.
Mm.
If we respond in this way when they let us down, if we can't solve our problems and our conflict with one another, what's going to happen? You're going to live in a loveless marriage. You're going to end your relationships with other people. You're not going to be able to keep friendships for very long. So it's awful if we remain in an immature emotional state
Yep.
when we need to move past that as adults, and as Christians especially, because even worse, I think everything that we've talked about tonight reflects spiritual qualities that we should grow in that mark a Christian,
Right.
right? I have a passage that I want to turn to and look at that, but Logan, do you have any comments or questions, or not questions? Do you have any comments?
No, but no, but seriously, I think that it's just important to remember that this is about going from point A to point B. Just because you practice one of these qualities, or you see somebody who does not mean that's just who they are. This is a maturity thing. I don't look at my 4-year-old and say, well, that's just who she is. She's never going to get any taller. She's going to mature. She's going to get bigger. She's going to get smarter. She's way smarter than me already. And so those maturities are going to happen. Emotional maturity happens on different paces, though. Mental maturity happens on different paces depending on your education and where you grow up. Physical maturity generally happens on the same pace for the most part, but obviously there's differences. But regardless, emotional maturity is not, that's just who you are. It's I need to grow in this way so that I can better deal with other people around me, and ultimately be a better person for it.
Yeah. I think about, and I think in the church, we recognize spiritual maturity as something that really can vary with age. Of course, we talk about how,
Sure.
the longer you are a Christian, typically, if you are making use of that time, you become wise. But I've also heard young people being told by older people that they are wise beyond their years, right? I don't know if you've ever got that compliment, Logan.
I have not. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I have actually.
Yeah.
I was like, they don't know me, but I did get the compliment.
Yeah, I have too, but like when I hear that, I'm like, I have so much more to grow. I mean,
Right.
like, but yeah. So, but there's
Well, and my question. This is way off topic, but my question was always like, what? Like, I feel I don't want to meet the people of my age that you know. I'm just kidding, but
but yeah. So these things that we're talking about, there are spiritual qualities linked to them, and I want to read a passage from Colossians chapter 3. Colossians 3 is one of my favorite chapters in all the Bible because it talks about the new creation, the new person. What are we supposed to be like since we've been raised with Christ? What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to look like? What are we supposed to pursue? And he starts in verse 12, the New American Standard Version. Paul says, "So as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved," right? We're beloved by God, we're chosen, we're set apart, we're holy. "Put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you." So, this is a kind of character that we're to pursue as Christians. And sulking and being quick to anger and isolating ourselves from other people, that doesn't sound like that to me. That sounds like I'm not being patient. That sounds like I'm being selfish and not humble. I'm not being kind. I'm not forgiving. I'm not being gentle. I'm not being compassionate. I'm not being, the word is not there, but empathetic. And I think that that's part of this too.
mm-hmm.
So what makes us think that if we are to continue in Christ, that we can allow ourselves to characteristically respond in this way? And I'll say that because none of us are perfect. And there may be something that happens to us that it's just the straw that breaks the camel's back, and we get angry, or we start to sulk, or we isolate for somebody. But we should never be in the state. We should definitely grow beyond these things being our characteristic response to the small stresses, to the little disappointments here and there. I didn't like the way that they. I asked them to fold the laundry and they didn't, so I'm not going to talk to them all day long. It's laundry. I mean, like, or I asked them to get me a coffee with sugar and cream, and they brought it to me black. So I'm gonna be angry and irate at them. I'm gonna isolate myself from them and treat them poorly. And is that really a Christian response to everyday disappointments and conflicts and problems? That should not be our characteristic way of living. If it is, if you find yourself there, I mean, we've got to move past that. We've got to move past that immature, uh, move past this being our typical way of responding to
Right.
things.
Absolutely. No, and the moving is what I think we need to hone in on. Just the moving past, growing up.
Yeah.
So it's not a stagnant thing, um, and that should be all aspects of our life. My relationship with God can't get stagnant because then I'm going to start losing it. When I haven't been to the gym in quite a while, and but luckily I have a semi-physical demanding job, and so I'm not losing a significant amount of muscle, just more than I would like. But if you're sediment in an area, you're going to lose it, and if you're immature in an area, then it's time to mature.
Right. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, we're gonna take a quick
You
break.
probably could have.
No. We're gonna take a quick break though, and we're gonna talk about the converse to these things, the counterpoints to each one. So don't go away. We'll be right back. Thank you so much for watching. We want to remind you to please like and follow, subscribe, share our content so that other people can see that, so that you will be aware of when we are posting, when we are putting out new content. So please do those things. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We're on Twitter, Instagram. We have Facebook, YouTube, and now we're on Rumble as well. If you like watching videos on Rumble, and maybe you're watching this on Rumble, we hope that you will find us there as well. We want to acknowledge the Ministry League because they are wonderful partners of ours. They have an incredible app. If you haven't downloaded the app yet, I don't know what you're waiting for, but there's a lot of content on there. It's one of the best ways that you can watch or listen to Bearing Up. So you can listen to that there. All of our episodes are there, as well as many episodes from many different podcasts in the Ministry League Network. So go check them out. Also, we want to ask you to please support us by checking out the Bearing Up shop. There's lots of new stuff on there, including a Rep Your Convictions product line that we have put out, and maybe I'll include some photos of some things that are on there. But those are great conversation pieces, things that you can, rep your convictions. You are representing. You've got a conversation piece for you as you're going out, you're interacting in the world. So please go check those things out. Again, thanks so much for watching. We're going to continue this episode. So welcome back. We're going to, again, talk about the converse to immaturity, talk about what direction that we're going to be moving towards if we find ourselves in any of these, having these characteristic responses to stress and conflict and whatnot. Now, I do want to start off and, again, kind of mention that well-adjusted adults oftentimes learn these things from their parents. We sort of alluded to this, and we didn't say that particularly, but most well-adjusted adults that operate in society and don't, respond in these ways and dramatic and very easily triggered ways. And I'm glad we used the word triggered because that should tell you something. Anyway, most well-adjusted
Buzzword.
Adults, yeah. That tells you something though about. Never mind. Most well-adjusted adults learn these things from their parents. There's a lot of not well-adjusted adults, but okay, I'm really done. There are those that you meet though, in their later years, and they never developed an emotional maturity beyond that of, a 13 or 14-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
And they've maintained that, um, throughout, the rest of their life. And that's not an insult. Um, it's not an insult to say that they never got the chance to learn this from their parents. What it means is that because they didn't have that kind of upbringing, it is on them to learn that as adults, right? The well-adjusted adults that got that way because of their parents, that's a great blessing. But not everybody has parents that, you know, raise them to be, you know, rational and patient and
Mm-hmm.
other things like that. And so you have to learn that almost without an adult teaching you. You have to learn that in other ways.
Right.
And so that's very difficult for a lot of people, and why a lot of people don't ever find that, and they keep making the same mistakes over and over and over again. Uh, well into their later years, into their midlife, and sometimes beyond. And it's very sad to find that situation. But it's not that there's no hope that they can't find emotional maturity.
Right.
So the converse to the first response, the sulking,
Mm-hmm.
is communication. Communication, right? And this could be in each a response with each one of these things, and it doesn't necessarily
I
have
think
to
a
do
lot of
with
these are probably
sulking.
interchangeable.
I think probably they all are. I think they probably all are in some way, because they are healthy. They are
Yes.
healthy, mature ways of responding, and so communication, and that really has to do with the ability to explain oneself and the emotions that one is feeling.
Right.
So, you know, sulking and festering and isolating, all of those things, each one of those things that we discussed at the beginning, they don't accomplish anything. And as long as the emotional need is not expressed, nothing is going to improve. You can't reconcile. You can't fix things unless somebody hears you out. You explain why you're feeling negatively towards them. Again, if you get mad at somebody over something that they didn't know that they did wrong, they may have thought that they had done something good by you,
Mm-hmm.
and you didn't take it the right way. They may be completely ignorant of it and find that you are treating them poorly and not really know what to do or say. Why not just explain that to them? Why not just communicate that problem or that strife?
Well, and one thing you said is, about what's healthy and what's mature, and again, this is about maturity and progression. Because I know folks, and met some of them. I don't know how many of my coworkers at work listen to my podcast. I know that there's probably a few, but there are people that I work with that do. They will go into sulk mode, and they want you to know that they're upset, but they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah.
They just want you to know you should feel bad. Um,
Yeah.
but that's not progress. How does that help anybody in any way, shape, or form?
It doesn't.
Um, and so communication is the opposite of that, and that's
Right.
why communication is the opposite of that, because hey, you made me mad. Well, I did that because blah 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 blah. Oh, well, that makes more sense. Now I see it from your side. Now I don't have to sulk around. I mean, maybe it's not that simple, but
Sometimes
that's
it
what.
can be.
But sometimes it is. I
Yeah.
mean, just hearing somebody else's point of view can sometimes make you realize that, oh, their actions actually make sense from their point of view. So that's that.
Yeah.
But that's what communication does for us, and that's why men will struggle with the sulking. because men generally aren't good communicators. I'm a terrible communicator. I thought I was a great communicator until I got married.
There you go.
And,
Until
and
you really have to
and
communicate.
then it was time to communicate, and I was not good at it. So, anyway, that's communication is key,
right.
and expressing
we
your
brought up
feelings.
communication a lot. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm what I'm saying is we've brought up communication a lot in previous episodes, and that just goes to show how important this is.
Correct.
Right? This is an area that we need to grow in. If we have not achieved that ability, the ability to explain oneself and where you're coming from, that's something that needs to be pursued. All right. So number 2, we could say this is a response to anger, but again, I think that it can be, like you said, Logan, applicable for all of them, and that is emotional regulation. Being able to regulate our emotions, to have the capacity to stay calm and to monitor our emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not wrong to feel a certain way about something. And the truth is, somebody might have done something to you, or there may be a conflict or stressor in your life, and it is, it's very legitimate that you feel that way.
Correct.
Like you have been betrayed. You have been, and so your feelings are founded. That might be very true. But that's not an excuse to behave irrationally.
Correct.
Right? You can feel the emotion. You can even use those emotions in productive ways, processing things, grief. You can process emotion in a healthy way, but the emotions, the feelings that we have should not cause us to act in ways that are unhealthy, that break relationships, that tear down, that add tension, that add more conflict to the already present conflict. So I want to say, and this may be hard to hear for some individuals, a person with little emotional regulation has the habit of quitting their job within a few days or a few months, a few weeks, because they may be feeling particularly stressed, or they may be feeling that, and they don't even count the cost. They quit their job, and then they have no income, and they don't really know what they're going to do. But somebody with a good emotional regulation recognizes that there's going to be days that are bad. There's going to be days where you want to quit. There are days that I want to quit, right? Because of a stress. But do I really take that in full stride? Is that a real temptation that I have, that I'm in danger of making that decision? No.
Mm-hmm.
Because I realize how important this job is for me and how important it is for other people. And I just cannot make that decision. I'm going
Correct.
to be rational about this, right? Those with little emotional regulation, they're the kind of individuals that they don't have stability in their life.
Right.
Because they act on these emotions and they don't see the upside sometimes, and they focus so much on the negative.
Right. Well, and a lot of that boils down to life's not black and white, right?
Right.
And we can't live it like it is. We can't go from hot to cold and react in those situations. And a lot of times that's what anger thrives on, especially unhealthy anger. A healthy anger is going to stay angry because there's actual reason and it's validated. Yeah. And an unhealthy anger will fizzle out. And maybe that's why I tend to withdraw, because I'd rather not get angry. But we'll come to that in a minute. But an unhealthy anger is going to take you from black to white, from hot to cold, and vice versa, like that. And that's when the emotional deregulation of your mental capacity and your emotional capacity is like an ocean in a storm. I mean, it's just going all over the place,
tossed to and fro.
Correct.
As the Bible talks about with.
Yep.
And that can be a part of this too. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you hear something, you know, you're taught something, you hear something that goes against what you've believed in scripture. And it's like, oh, well, maybe I believe that now. And I don't hold to what I've been holding to for
Yeah.
forever. You know, um, so, but I'm glad you talked about that in the black and white kind of way
Mm-hmm.
because if you have a bad day at work and you see life that way, you might assume, well, if I had a bad day today, this must be a bad job. This must be, I shouldn't be doing this, you know? Or you have a particular day that's like, I, I'm about to be worn out. I don't know if I can handle this.
Right.
Therefore, I can't handle this job. I'm going to quit. You know, and I'm talking about the job thing because a lot of people experience that, and I've seen people cause a lot of stress in their own life and instability in their own life because of their own choices. It's their own choices that are based in emotional immaturity that cause them to lead this. It's almost like a reciprocal, cyclical path where there's upset, there's stressors, there's something, and then their life changes drastically,
Right.
and then something happens, and you know it's really this area in their life that they if they would emotionally mature and recognize that it's not black and white. And I was talking to Emily about this, and I wanted to mention this. You know, they say that you'll do what you love, as a job, and you'll never work a day in your life.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe that's true. I mean, you can enjoy your job for the most part, right? You can enjoy a lot of aspects, maybe most of the aspects of your job, but I doubt that you're going to not consider it as work when you have to go somewhere and do something for several hours of the day
You have
when
to.
you could be out fishing or doing something else that you enjoy.
Right.
You have the habitual act of going to this place or doing this thing, and you have a commitment. It's work, right? And you may love doing it, but it's work, right? And there are going to be bad days with ministry. I think this is the greatest job that there is. I really do. I'm so blessed to do the greatest thing that you can do. Uh, in my opinion, right? That's what I think. But do I find hard days? Absolutely. Are there days where I'm like, I don't know if I can handle this? Absolutely. But I'm not going to quit over that. I'm not going to just,
Mm-hmm.
you know, allow that stress to
When
cause me to act in ways that I should not act,
correct.
right? And same with relationships, right? I may have a bad day with Emily, right? I don't think I've ever had a bad day with Emily, but eventually I will probably. Uh, you know, that happens. We're gonna get married. Sure, we're gonna have bad days. But does that mean I'm gonna like give up on her because we had a bad day?
No.
Absolutely not. No, because I'm planning to make that commitment to her for
Correct.
life, right? And so, I mean, somebody who's well adjusted and mature emotionally, they're going to recognize that, I'm feeling this thing, right?
Right.
But I'm not going to allow it to take control of me.
That's it.
I'm
And that's
ranting.
it.
I
No,
am
you're
so
good,
ranting.
and I love it. But that's what it is, and control. And what are you allowing to control your life? Are you allowing your emotions and your immaturity to control your life, or are you going to take control and say, because that's what mature people do. And so you may be mentally mature but emotionally immature, and that's the niche where you can say, man, I am emotionally immature, because you realize that. You may not be mentally mature and not realizing that you're being emotionally mature. And so there's a pathway, but ultimately the end goal is to always mature.
Yeah.
Physically, you don't have a choice. You're going to mature. But spiritually and mentally and emotionally, sometimes those things get put on the back burner,
Right.
and we don't mature in those areas. And I think emotionally is probably the worst. It definitely right there with spiritual maturity, but mental emotional maturity gets put on the back burner. behind physically, mentally, spiritually. Like emotions will just fall in line. That's not the case.
Yeah. Since we talked about this, and I think I said before, like this has nothing to do with intellectual maturity,
Correct.
right? You could be incredibly smart, and you could be incredibly book smart, and you could be the smartest person in the room, and yet act when you face conflict. You can act like you're an adolescent.
Yep.
And I want to say this too. There is a huge uptick in the importance of mental health over the past several decades, in the last few decades especially. And there's a lot of mental health. We're going to focus on mental health. But I wonder if we focused on emotional health, if we would have as many problems with mental health. Because I feel like a lot of those things, mental health, as a result, a lot of problems come sometimes because of our circumstances and what we're dealing with, and trauma, past things, relationships. And, people develop, all kinds of things because of, what's going on in their life. And if they don't have the emotional maturity to act in reasonable and responsible ways, it may cause them a lot of stress. It may cause them to develop depression. It may cause them to develop some other issues that they have. And they are connected. I do want to say they are connected, or they're connected and they're disconnected, right?
Well, the analogy that I've used for this similar topic before is our lives are like strands. Let me explain. Your mental health, your emotional health, and your spiritual health, and your physical health. They're all four wrapped together, and they're all strands. They're all strands by themselves, and they're all painted. They're all painted their own color, but they're all braided together.
Yeah.
Now, I can isolate my mental health, and it's its own thing, but guess what? It paint rubbed off on the others. And that, maybe it's yellow, and the paint rubbed off on the others. And because they're intertwined, they're constantly meshing with one another. So yes, I can isolate my mental health. I can isolate my spiritual health. I can isolate my emotional health and maturity. But ultimately, they're still tied together, making me who I am. Therefore, if I isolate one and only focus on one, and that's the strongest one, I'm going to be leaning on that one, which is fine, but it's not totally separate. They all need to be intertwined. We need to be progressing mature. We all need to be maturing in each category individually so that they can come together as one.
Yeah, absolutely. I am looking at our time, and we are going to kind of speed this up here towards the end, but I do want to talk about our final two things. And there's two.
We had a long break, so.
Yeah. Okay. But the third converse thing, the thing that we can grow in maturity is openness. Right? Openness is the capacity to be vulnerable.
Right.
And that's crucial in relationships as well, and how we're dealing with things, and again, like how we are able to deal with other stressors and conflict too.
Right.
The emotionally mature recognize their own weakness and failures and open themselves up emotionally in ways that are real. They're honest. They tell people what they're feeling, and they are open to trust others, knowing full well that it may cause them harm.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It may cause somebody to, and one example of this is somebody's done something wrong to you, but because you're open about how you're feeling and what you're talking about, you use communication, they're intertwined, and you talk to that person and you tell them what you feel. I feel that what you did to me really hurt me. And they might just retaliate. They may look at this thing and they may not treat it because maybe they don't have emotional maturity, and so they say, "How dare you?" Now, I can't believe you thought that was offensive, or I can't believe that you got angry at me over that. You know, but somebody who's open is open to the reality that that might happen.
Yep.
But they want to have the capacity to trust others. They want to have the capacity of allowing healing to take place. Because if we're closed off, if we're isolated, if we don't allow for communication to happen, then nothing gets solved, nothing gets fixed. So, by being open, by forcing oneself to be vulnerable and saying, I know I might get hurt for saying this, or I might get hurt for doing this, but I'm just going to be real. I'm going to be me. I'm going to let them know, where I am, and I'm going to open myself up to get hurt, perhaps. But that's important because
Right.
the mature realize that honesty is the best policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
Anything to add?
and this is a big one for me because it goes back to my struggle with withdrawing. It's coming in and being who you are and just explaining. And the thing that I've had to realize is that my wife's on my side.
Yeah.
Obviously. Duh, Logan. Come on.
Right.
But that when I do this, she's much less likely to be like, why? She's much less likely, actually, probably from 99% to 0% likely to bring it back up because we've actually had a conversation about it now, as opposed to me withdrawing and trying to ignore it. But when I'm open and say, hey, I didn't like how you did this, she can say, well, great, I'm glad you brought that up because I also didn't like how you did this. Perfect. Now we're having an open conversation.
Yeah.
And that's what healthy relationships do.
Yeah.
And maybe, we go back to work because most everybody has a job. But like with my work environment, there are a handful of people I can do that with. There's a handful I can't. But the ones that I am open with, I have a better relationship with. So, anyway, I'll leave that where that's at.
Yeah. Okay. So, the fourth point and
Yes.
final point is
Yes.
something that I personally have added because I feel like I feel like we can't really have this conversation without talking
Zack
about
special.
empathy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Empathy. Um, that, yeah, again, is something that has to do with emotional maturity because the emotionally mature, they're able to set their perspective to the side. They still recognize their perspective. Maybe they can't see fully past it, but they put it to the side enough to attempt to understand where others are coming from. And that has to do with being compassionate towards others, right? Somebody's wronged you, okay? Well, maybe there was something that set them off. Maybe there's something that I did that I didn't even realize that I did, and I was actually the first offender. Or maybe it has nothing to do with me. They had a really bad day, and they took it out on me. Or maybe they're tired, or maybe they didn't think about what they were saying. And some people, you know, we as human beings will, stick our foot in our mouth every once in a while because we say something, maybe we didn't mean it, or maybe we weren't even really thinking about what we were saying, or maybe it just came off in a weird tone or something like that. There was no ill intent behind it, but it just came out a certain way, and you know, uh, so trying to understand where people are coming from, uh, and recognizing that you know this life isn't all about you, right? And that's something that the emotionally immature don't understand. Like if I'm hurt, then the world has to cater to me, right? The world has to figure out what's wrong with me. The world can just deal with my anger.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Like a child.
give me my space. Yes, and it's like a child does,
Mm-hmm.
and that's emotionally immature. So, having empathy, recognizing that you know maybe somebody legitimately forgot an engagement that you're supposed to have with somebody, call you or to go get coffee or something like that. Maybe they legitimately forgot. How are you going to respond about that? I mean, maybe there was no ill intent. Maybe there was no, you know, something came up, they forgot to write it down in their planner. There was something that happened and they just didn't do that. Or I don't know, maybe there's something else that happens and it's just like things didn't turn out the way that I wanted them to. Well, and it's not just trying to understand where people come from when they harm you,
Right.
but
Empathy.
understanding that. I was just going to say this one thing. I'll let you.
Oh, you're good.
I'll
No,
let
go
you.
ahead.
But also understanding that the way that I respond towards people may hurt them. Right. The way that I show my feelings through sulking or anger or isolation, that may hurt somebody else. That might put strain on my relationship with that other person. So I need to have empathy with them and withhold those things from them, not respond in those kinds of ways to hurt them. So
I'm going to do this. I'm going to say this about empathy. I'm going to just make it short and sweet. I'm going to quote the Bible.
there you go.
The idea, the summarization of empathy for me is the golden rule.
Yeah.
Treat others the way you want to be treated.
Yeah.
That's what empathy is about. So when someone is sulking, when someone is having an angry outburst, how would I want to be treated if I'm doing that? When you're the person who's sulking, am I doing what I would want them to do to me? And that's basically what empathy boils down to. But the problem with that is that's an extremely mature thing. And if you're an emotionally immature person who struggles with some of these things, like I have been in my life and probably sometimes still am,
Yeah. I think we all do.
You miss that empathy because it is all about you, and it's a humility and a golden rule. Jesus said it: just treat others the way you want to be treated.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up because that is probably the very first rule that we teach children.
It is.
Right?
Because they have these tendencies.
Right. They have these tendencies. And so the very first rule that we try to teach children, it's posted in every kindergarten class, across the United States, the golden rule: treat others the way you want to be treated.
Yep.
And it's posted there and it's so, widespread because that's what they need.
Yep.
They need, in
Reminders.
order to be well adjusted, in order to treat people the way that they should be treated, they have to be reminded.
Correct.
This is the way that I need to go. And as parents, train up a child the way he should go. That's probably the first rule that you should teach your children. I'm not going to tell you how to parent. Not so
I will.
Maybe in another episode I will.
There you go.
and then at that point, never mind. So, but thank you so much for listening or watching today.
Absolutely.
I think this has been a good episode. It's been a little bit different.
I've loved it. It's been fun.
But Logan, he's got our servant spotlight, which he will get to in a moment after he leads us in prayer.
Let's pray together. Dear God, we thank you so much for today. We thank you for the freedom we have to talk about topics that sometimes aren't fun for us. Lord, I pray that you touch the hearts of people who need to be touched, and you touch the mouths of those who can speak to them. I pray that those who hear this message tonight, God, are touched by it, and that they self-evaluate. God, I pray that Zach and I are also always self-evaluated, that we're not just up on a high horse, that God, that we self-evaluate and we come into every conversation with a humble heart. Lord, we thank you and we love you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Tonight's Servant Spotlight. Today, on the day of this recording, it's a week ago from when you're watching it, it's Veterans Day. And so the Servant Spotlight today is Veterans Day. I don't specifically have veterans in my family, at least a few generations back, so I can't even think of one. You might have to go back to the Civil War. But Veterans Day is a very important day because it honors Memorial Day honors those men who died in combat. Veterans Day honors the ones who came back. And so, if you didn't thank a veteran, do it today. A lot of them will still wear their hats as a badge of honor because they did something that I do not have the courage to do. So, honor them, thank one if you see them, and hope you have a blessed day. Thanks for watching.